Welcome to David Nair on air, all the way from down under Brisbane, Australia. I understand we commenced the broadcast of this event through to India, Australia, South Africa, UAE, US, Canada, UK, Europe, Malaysia, and Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely welcome those that are looking and watching this video from wherever you are. Yes, we have had a number of weeks off, primarily because certain activities were being held up in the studios. I sincerely apologize for that, but we will continue on a weekly basis hereafter. By the way, who's David Nair? As a peak performance coach, keynote speaker, author, book titled I Excel, Wired for Success, Your Purpose Matrix, Grail. So I put up 5 books. My key purpose in doing this on-air conversation is to bring and create people's awareness in different subjects. Why do I do that? Because I have a purpose in mind to create a mindset shift, a heart set shift, and a soul set shift in 1 million people, such that their generation and the next can be uplifted and given hope. This weekly broadcast does not come with ease. It takes a lot of effort and time in selecting the various speakers. Today, we have none other than a very, very reputable doctor all the way from Brisbane, Australia, qualified from UK. His name is Dr. Andy Lee. And in talking with Doctor today, I hope to enlighten individuals on the subject of ADHD. Welcome, Dr. Andy Lee. How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks, David, for letting me join your program.
Fabulous. Great to see you and welcome you. I know we're getting a bit cold weather down here, but I'm sure the guys up north will be having some wonderful weather. But let's hone in on the subject because we only got some time, limited time. Why don't I kickstart with your story, a little bit of your journey from A to B, and how you came into this subject of ADHD, and what did it mean to you from then?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's quite an interesting story. I self-diagnosed myself in the 3rd year of medical school. That's when I found out I had ADHD. When I found out, it explained why I did poorly at school, why I failed a lot of exams at medical school. And then I diagnosed myself in 3rd year when a psychiatrist went through in a psychiatry lecture about all the different health conditions related to mental health, from ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety, and so forth. And as he went through the symptoms of ADHD, I was like, tick, 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 tick. That's me. Right. And then I realized I had ADHD. And then I realized, it was funny at the time because we were in a lecture theatre of 150 students at Liverpool University Medical School. And so the lecturer was saying, the prevalence of ADHD in the general public is roughly 8%, but in doctors it's 10%, and in GPs it's 10%, and in pathologists it's even more. And so everyone's looking around each other and pointing around and saying, hey, that person got ADHD, that person got ADHD as well. So it was quite a funny, enlightening experience.
Interesting, because as soon as you and I started talking on this subject, that's exactly what I did. In my back of my mind, I was going through and seeing the behavior patterns and sort of visualizing where they are, what they're doing, and why the performance was impacted in relation to whether it's speaking or in relation to coaching, whatever. And I've chronically just going through and ticking this without even any test, okay? So that's an interesting benchmark. And there's nothing wrong with ADHD. It's only that as long as you're aware of it, you can then move forward and try to combat any subsequent issues, challenges that come out of it. Why don't we stop here for a moment and you deep dive into this subject of ADHD? What is it? Why are people sometimes so cautious of it and concerned about it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, I mean, ADHD these days is almost becoming a little bit topical and fashionable. More and more people are saying they've got ADHD. And it's not because I think people is saying that they've got ADHD because it's fashionable. It's because we're becoming more and more aware of it. Because of social media, people are realizing actually when people talk about the symptoms, they kind of resonate with those symptoms and go, oh, I have that. I have this, I have that. And so the awareness is rising. But ADHD is really out there. I mean, worldwide, there are 366 million sufferers of ADHD.
Wow.
It's a lot of sufferers. So globally, 6.8% on average per country. Now, some countries have more, some countries have less, but on average, globally, 6.8% of the population has ADHD.
Right.
And then because we have the audience in India there's actually a little bit more. For India, it's 11.32%.
Golly.
And because of the growing population of India, that equates to annually 10 million children each year diagnosed with ADHD who then become adults.
Andy, is this prominently amongst children, or does it go right through to the adults and thereafter? I mean, is there a fix for it?
Well, you're kind of, in general, born with it a lot of the time. There are environmental factors that can trigger ADHD in some cases, but in general, that's somewhat genetic from parents and things like that. And then also, but then what happens is when you have the diagnosis of ADHD as a child, when you have it as a child, you then generally carry on with that into adulthood in about anything between 35 to 70% of cases, depending on which country. And so it does carry on. But the main problem is that a lot of people don't get diagnosed as a child. They get missed. They get mislabeled as naughty children or inattentive children or, just very talkative, very disruptive. And they have these problems, but then they go on to become an adult and they have the adult version of those same problems, but they manifest in a different way.
Okay. Why don't we explain to people, let's start with the basic. What is ADHD and what are some of the general symptoms that a person can look for and be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's also known as ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder, because some don't always have the hyperactive component. And they're sometimes the tricky ones because if they're not hyperactive, if they're not the kids literally climbing up the walls, then you kind of get missed, and that's what happens. But those people still have the same amount of problems as anybody else with ADHD. They just don't have the obvious hyperactive component. And the symptoms depends. In a child, as I mentioned before, it's, talking a lot, disruptive, not paying attention, doing poorly at school. But in adults, it manifests as generally inattention, so poor attention to things, easily distractible, starting tasks all the time, starting new tasks before finishing old tasks, getting procrastination, taking a long time to do things, finishing tasks, getting overwhelmed by all those tasks, then sometimes getting anxious by those tasks, and then sometimes subsequently getting depressed by those tasks.
And jumping from task to task is also a symptom, right?
It is, yeah. So because one of the features of ADHD is that people with ADHD don't produce dopamine, they shift from task to task because when people with ADHD come up with the idea, because they're very creative thinkers. So when they come up with ideas, they get a hit of dopamine. So they love that. So when they come up with these ideas, they get a hit of dopamine. And so they'll come with lots of ideas because they're getting lots of hits of dopamine. But then when it comes to following through, because you don't get any further dopamine, any reward in the reward center, then they don't actually follow through the tasks. So this is why they have so many great ideas, they start so many tasks, but never actually finish the tasks.
Right. So the follow-up and follow-through on an activity or a task that's been assigned is dropped. And
Yes.
and obviously when that happens continuously, a person that's not aware, or a supervisor or an employer that's not aware of it, would automatically put it to poor performance, and in a lot of cases, dismiss the person. The other thing is not even give them improvements or scale ups in their salaries, whatever it is when it comes to annual reviews. Now, how is this awareness being pushed through to the community out there that people are suffering from ADHD, and this is a issue that we need to look at?
Yeah, I think, social media, good or bad, has really enlightened and highlighted these issues to a lot of people. So a lot of people have come forward. In my GP surgery, I'm seeing patients who are saying, I've been told, I think I've got ADHD, someone's told me because someone seems to be on social media, or they've recognized some of the symptoms and signs of ADHD, or they've seen something themselves that resonates with ADHD. So I think the advent of social media has really highlighted it. And so we've seen a lot more people coming through in general practice.
Right. And this idea of trying to get awareness, do you think there should be some form of, now that you've written a book also, do you think there should be some form of structured awareness campaign out there? Because this is a never-ending cycle. And why I say that is, a person who might be excellent in performance, but because of this little handicap that person might have, he or she doesn't know how to express that. Whereas if a third person puts this out there with the symptoms, hey guys, look out for this, and help the person in the following way, would that help?
Yeah, I think it's awareness. I think the key thing is awareness. The biggest problem with this is people just go through life. So people just, they basically struggle because they just think it's their personality. They just think, oh, that's just me. I'm quirky. I'm forgetful. I'm late. I'm always late for my appointments. Yes, I don't finish things. Yes, I've got organized piles of chaos. They just think it's them. That's the thing. It's the real lack of recognition. And even when you sometimes tell them about the symptoms, they still don't recognize it themselves. They don't even see it. They just think it's their quirky personality. They don't actually see it. It's only when you, like, for example, as a doctor, when I get to speak to some of my patients and I start to accumulate a list of all their symptoms and all the things that they're doing, and I pick up, I think they're sending out so many signals, they're exhibiting features which are very suggestive of ADHD. But it's actually very hard, which is why so many people get misdiagnosed, and people go to psychologists and other specialists, and it's not apparent to them because they present in different ways. So they present with anxiety, they present with depression, and not necessarily, no one presents and say, hey, I've got ADHD. It's usually they present with the consequences of their problem, not the actual symptoms.
Right. Now, you mentioned and you touched on one character trait that's not being punctual. Now, this is one thing that I've been harping on with a lot of my on-platform type discussions and masterminds that I conduct, numerous of them per week, something like 15 to 20. Now, what I do is I make sure there's a 10-minute gap and get people to come in. But different countries have got this slightly different. Some countries are extremely punctual. The guys attend it in time. Some cases they come ahead of time. Whereas there's one country, and my heart bleeds. I'm actually crucifying these guys when they come in late. Now, tell me, how can I fix this problem? I'm one of the guys that's suffering on the other end. Okay. And I'm approaching them and saying, hey guys, why can't you come early? Why can't you come 5 minutes? So it's a habit of ADHD, so I decided to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's no quick fix. Essentially, it's about solving the whole issue of the ADHD and its problems. So first of all, if you tackle the organizational element, in terms of not being overwhelmed, because I think that's a problem when people are so busy and overwhelmed. That's when they easily become forgetful, and then rushing and doing too many things, and then they rush everything, and so everything is done last minute. And so it's that inherent problem where, firstly, they are just overwhelmed because they've taken on too many things, they're doing too many things in the first place, and then, which is the first thing. But then with the actual appointments, a lot of ADHD sufferers have what's called known as time blindness. They simply do not have a concept of time. So they'll be doing something, and before they know it, they think it's going to take them 5 or 10 minutes. Half an hour's gone, or an hour. And this is a problem. And before they know it, then that's why they're always late for appointments. It also causes issues because they're always rushing to places. And so people with ADHD are more likely to get speeding tickets because they're always speeding on the road as well.
Right.
So,
right.
And so practical suggestions would be the obvious thing, is to be set reminders and things like that. And then and sequence reminders where you go, okay, half an hour before a meeting, 15 minutes before a meeting, 5 minutes of meeting, and that sequence of reminders then helps to keep you grounded. Because then if you are distracted, because people will still, even with a half an hour reminder, they're so busy in that half an hour, then they forget that they actually got a live, podcast to do. Because they're so distracted.
And they lost it. And they lost it.
Yes, correct. It's escaped their mind. And that's why. So this, yeah. And if you're, as I've spoken before, if you're dealing with business people, like entrepreneurs, if you get 100 entrepreneurs, they're more likely to have ADHD. So it's statistically, an entrepreneur in a room of 100 entrepreneurs, 29% will have ADHD. So I think,
oh my God, 1/3 of it.
Yes. So the people you deal with, one in 3 is going to have ADHD.
As you were discussing some of the situational cases there, in my mind straight away I knew. I've got an MC sometimes who does that, and I've got some players who come to meetings late. And you say having this timely reminders. Now it suddenly triggered to me because I run a lot of webinars too, commercial webinars, which is on Facebook campaigns and all of that type of thing. And they send reminders on that day of the webinar. There are reminders floating out, first and foremost 6 hours before, and then 4 hours before, and then 2 hours before, and then by the hour every 15 minutes. And then they send WhatsApp messages. Now I understand why that many messages are going out.
I mean, that's a very practical way, and that's, and there's other ways of dealing with it. But yeah, that's a very practical way that I suggest to my patients, my clients, on how to basically not be late for appointments. Because they, when they get late for appointments, it's usually something vital to them, whether it's like a business meeting or a health, a doctor's appointment or some other appointment. And then the people with ADHD, because they do this frequently, they really beat themselves up about it a lot as well. So they really kind of suffer and beat themselves up about it as well. So it has other knock-on effects to them personally and as well as professionally. Right.
Andy, when we were talking earlier, I think last week, I can't recall, separate to today, this morning's talk with you and I, you addressed a case of technology, okay, and how people get hampered with it, and hence that what I call shortcut approach to solution drives. Would you like to elaborate on that so people can see and feel it?
I mean, I've noticed over the years that, society is changing. We're now bombarded with social media and with so many distractions. There's over 1 billion hours of content on YouTube. There's lots of social media platforms. You've got your Instagram, your Facebooks, your Snapchats, and then not only that, we're bombarded with endless content on things like streaming services like Netflix. And people these days, I've noticed, are not dealing with their problems like they used to in the past, where they would talk to people and have a dialogue and discuss their problems and solve their issues. Attention spans are, as we know, falling, and people are solving their problems either by getting very quick answers from their friends on messaging apps, on WhatsApp or messages, and sharing their problems rather than discussing their problems, but sharing the problems on a text or a message, and then getting a relatively short answer to that problem without any dialogue. or minimal dialogue or compared to talking, and they're kind of solving their life issues via text or via messages, and not, like we used to do with standing in front of each other, face to face, having a conversation and solving it and bouncing ideas and sharing ideas. And so, and then there's also the accessibility to Google. And so people, when they have a problem, because it's sometimes difficult to get access to a doctor or things, they Google their problem and they're looking for these answers. But unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it's rubbish in, rubbish out. So unless you really know what's happening with you, you're not going to get the right answer. And so you're going to get the answer, what you think is the right answer, but it's not necessarily the right answer for you, because really you need to see a specialist, either a professional, whether it's a doctor or a counselor or a psychologist.
Right. It's interesting, because I had a associate of mine in Delhi who, during COVID time, everything came to a freeze. Okay? And kids were studying at home, even preschool in some cases. So once COVID was finished and the gates were open, so to speak, this particular lady took her little toddler to preschool. And there was nobody there. She was one of the first people there. And the little kid was running around with all these big toys that the kids can play with, the seesaw and the riding horse. And she was so excited. And she was running into the school in the classroom. And she said, Mommy, is this mine? Is this all for me? Because she's never even envisaged going to preschool before that. This is her first encounter there. Okay? Now, how many people are like that with ADHD? Because they're not aware of the situation and they're left high and dry, and then when they confronted it in relation to performance or in relation to how they observe things, they just lost it. And this child then turns around and mommy had to pamper her and say, it's yours. It's got to be left here. Don't cry. We got to go home. But tomorrow when you come back, it'll be here. That explanation had to go in. Now I'm saying, what can we do? I'm constantly harping on this. What can we do to scale up that awareness?
Yeah, I think, just to take you on that point, just use the statistics for Australia, where I am, but it will equally apply to any country around the world. So, as I said before, the average prevalence, which percentage of people that have ADHD globally, is 6.8%. In Australia, the percentage that is treated and on medication based on 6.8% is just a tenth. Just a tenth. So not everyone needs medication, but what it means is, let's say, I don't know, you could say 2/10 don't need medication perhaps. Then you're talking about probably 6 or 7/10 of that is undiagnosed. Now, with ADHD, like all conditions, any mental health conditions, people are on a spectrum. So, it's not a yes and no. There's people go from one end to another end, and it's just an in between. But for clinically diagnosed ADHD, that's, that DSM classification for ADHD, then in Australia, globally, 6.8%, but only a tenth are managed. So that's referring to your point. Yes, at the moment, one in 10 of that 6.8% is actually on medication, which means there's a whole cohort of people who are unaware of this diagnosis. And to answer your question, yes, raising awareness. So I think, I think social media has a role to play. Professionals have a role to play. Health campaigns have a role to play. And I think, it's incumbent on also businesses, because businesses don't realize that, on average, 6.8% of their employees are not functioning very well because they have this affliction, but they don't realize it. So, maybe as a HR thing, there's something where employers will help with finding that. If they find that as let's say, for example, if you find an employee who's perhaps not performing as well as he should be, rather than chastising them, saying, why aren't you doing so? Why are you not performing? Why are you not doing this, that, and the other? Maybe we should consider, maybe they have something which is affecting their ability to perform, and consider maybe ADHD as a diagnosis.
Very true. Going back to the COVID time, I want to illustrate another example here. COVID time, there's a company in Bangalore which does a lot of the gaming programs for Harry Potter. And they have something like 300, 400 employees. And they're all in the age bracket from about 18, 19, 20 to about late 20s to early 30s. Okay. Now, pre-COVID, they would go to work and they would all the luxuries. You know, they provide basically a gym facility, they provide cafeteria and all of that type of thing. So whenever the guy or girl wants to get a break away from what they're coding, thinking, and all that, they just get up at the desk and they go and do that. And in so doing, they get to that situation, and thereafter they come back and they continue with the work. Watch this. When they're at home, there's no cafeteria to go to, apart from the kitchen, and there is no billiard tables to go to. So their performance was scaling down. And I had a call from the CEO saying, what can we do? So I brought in some programs which was very effective and it scaled them up. But I did not realize, if I knew what I know now on ADHD, I would have approached it from a different angle, knowing that, this is what I'm saying, even I was not aware of the inflictions that ADHD can do. I would have approached it from the angle of, yes, we'll do some of the exponential training and learning, but at the same time, do a diagnostic of this, do a measurement of this, and then see how you can scale yourself up based on it. I wasn't aware of that. So, and now you've created that awareness in me.
Yeah, so, and then that's a very good point there, because, and to use COVID as example is a really good example. So when it's almost a good determinator of discriminator of finding out if someone's got ADHD. So when you've got an employee who goes to the office and then they've got set tasks, they have a timetable of tasks, because there's a structure there, they will follow that structure, because they're expected to do targets. They're sat there in front of a computer. There's no distractions, or there's minimal distractions. They get on with their work, and therefore they perform as expected. But when they're at home, working from home, and it's not just with ADHD, because there's lots of distractions, and if you've got family there, children, or other things. But aside from that, the problem that people have, and especially with people with ADHD, is they get attracted to lots of shiny objects around them, so they get distracted. So they have so many things that they have to do at home that they know they have to do, because, as I mentioned, about all these unfinished tasks. So when they're having a break, they'll go off and make a cup of coffee, let's say, but then they go, oh, there's that thing I need to do. Oh, so I'll do that. Oh, that reminds me, I've got to do the other task as well. Oh, I need to do that. And they start doing that. Oh, they go, oh, that reminds me of this other task. I'll start to do that. And before you know it, they're over here, that way, doing this task. Then really they should have been here doing this task.
Exactly.
And then before you know it, half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours has passed, and they don't realize it because they got distracted. And then that's so almost like a discriminator. That almost identifies someone with ADHD, that alone.
So true. Now, I'm not going to penalize this person that's come and asked a question. I know for a fact Deeps has come in late, and she missed our first discussion. So, for the purpose of that, can I get you to readdress the question that I asked you earlier? How does one identify ADHD in adults in these tough times?
Yeah, so you can go to, there's lots of websites that you can do a self-test online. A lot of them charge. So one of the best tests that doctors use as a screening test is known as a CARS test, which is a CAARS, a Connor's Adult ADHD Rating Scale. Now, you can get that usually for a charge in lots of places, but there's a UK website called ADHD Me, And if you go to that website at adhdme.org, I think it is, if you go to that website, you can get that test, and they'll give you a score, give you a likelihood of whether you're likely to have ADHD. And if you take a screenshot, then you get the test for free. Otherwise, if you go to the next step, they ask you for some money.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. And I hope that answers your question too, Deepa. Now, we spoke about India. We are having, what was the figure you mentioned annually?
Yeah, so the prevalence, so the percentage of the population of India that has ADHD is more than the global average of 6.8%. So in India, it's 11.32%. It's much higher.
God.
And that equates to annually 10 million children diagnosed each year who then become adults.
That's just diagnosed each year, so it's upping every time. And what do they do? I mean, how do doctors cope with it, or how do schools cope with it? How do employers cope with it?
It causes lots of issues. So in schools, traditionally, they're the naughty kids. A lot of them are deemed the naughty child. They're inattentive. They can't sit still. They're very fidgety. They want to get out of their chair. They always want to talk to their other fellow pupils. So they're always interrupting. They're always in trouble. They're always doing detention. And as you get older, they're the ones who don't complete their homework because if they don't have any interest in it, they don't do the homework. So they get in trouble for not doing the homework, and then they end up in detention. And this repeats itself, and it continues as they go through the school years. And then it doesn't end there. And as I said before, it varies in different countries, but on average, about childhood ADHD continues into adulthood in about 60%, sometimes 70% of the time. So they carry it through.
Right. Now, these community of people ranging from kids, adolescents, and adults with the symptoms, they are left there. And some of the environmental factors influence, in India, for example, culturally, having to live with the extended family, having to do certain, what I call norms that comply with family requirements, quite separate to some of the Western countries. Do you think that has an influence factor to scale up ADHD?
Not really. I think, it's ADHD, there's a large genetic component. So it is passed down quite a lot of times genetically. So if a parent has it, there's a good chance their child would have it. And so if communities are living together, like extended families in the Indian population, then you're going to see cohorts of people exhibiting very similar behaviors. Now, because they're exhibiting similar behaviors, it almost becomes acceptable. It almost becomes like a family trait. And so you recognize it as a problem because everyone in that family does that because it's genetic. And, it's not all bad, but it's almost things that this is what we do as a family. This is what our family members do. So it doesn't get really recognized. Outsiders might recognize it, but people within don't really essentially recognize it. Right.
Now, you also touched just now on the computer and how the shortcut to a shortcut type approach in responses for messaging. Computers were supposed to be generated to ease our workload, but it has not.
No.
Okay, very honestly, because it's scaling up. Now, with that in mind, and with people suffering from ADHD, how do you think their attention span is going to be when they have to move from one to the other constantly, and their throughput of work, whatever they're doing on the screen for an employer, is there for them to actually have some measurement to say, I've done so much of productivity? Why I ask this question is, one of my clients is a bank, and they do the operations globally in a place in Chennai, the back office work. Now, each time a check is deposited, for example, in Brisbane, it's scanned, it's sent over there, and they do the processing from there. So by the early morning when they come back, they're all time zoned. So in the early morning when they get into the office here, it's all up there on the screen of the account. So that processing element would also be drastically impacted, okay, both from an accuracy perspective and also from a throughput perspective. How are we going to turn around and measure the person and say to him, look out for these following things, like a measuring stick, a dipstick check, as they go through this process?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So, we always thought that when computers were invented, that they were amazing and they're going to make our jobs easier because they're going to help automate a lot of processes. But what we've noticed is, in actual fact, is computers actually have done the converse. They're actually making us work harder because of the efficiency that computers can afford us. We're actually doing more work because we're processing more work. We're actually doing more stuff. We're achieving more stuff in less time. So we're actually dealing with more volume because we can with the assistance of computers. So it's, compared to a previous generation, we're getting quite overloaded with the volume of work in comparison. And so with that in mind, if you've got an affliction where you already have issues processing and you easily get overloaded and you overcommit yourself and you're overburdened, then that's when it creates anxiety where you are, with the work process on top of your other issues, it's causing a problem. And so you start to then have performance issues. And then if you then start to fall behind, that situation then aggravates itself, and it's like a self-fulfilling problem then, and so it can lead to big problems. And it does lead to people with ADHD, disciplinary issues, and other problems. So, just as an example, if you have ADHD, or if you were in the criminal justice system, you are 10 times more likely to have ADHD if you're in the criminal justice system. So it causes those kind of problems as well.
My God, that's startling. Now, I also want to go back. Just now, we spoke about touched on the subject of shortcut to a shortcut, that process of messaging and all of that. Now, I'm an advocate of this neuroplasticity, the stretching of your brain, and in so doing, it actually does not coil back to its original shape. Now, with this shortcut, when we talk about messaging and one word or one phrase or two phrases, that's only the messaging. But in the other areas, because of this mentality, the mindset, a quick response, a quick hi, as opposed to sitting and conversing, how do you think the coming generation, as they get into it, how would their neuroplasticity be framed to do the functioning of the neuroplasticity? Number one, because you need to stretch it for it to function effectively. And if it's not stretched regularly, it goes stale. Number two, how do you get your amygdala to come out of that, and the person now come out of being in that state or victim state to start using the traction that's required here from the frontal cortex? So in doing this, he or she then, guess what, is able to rid of that ADHD, so to speak, because they're putting action into the task. So we need to make this functional, and we need to make the neuroplasticity functional. But if we are working in an environment of shortcut, how can we get over it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The key to all this, which is, will be my forthcoming book, essentially the first part, which is the obvious part, is for the person to basically empty their mind. Because we are so overloaded, we are so overwhelmed with so many things going on in our lives that this is the problem. There's so much thing going on. Our heads are like giant washing machines, things whirring around. We've got hundreds of things going on in our head. How can you think straight? How can you come to a reasonable conclusion to something when you've got all these distractions going on in your head. And that's the problem. You can't. So the first place for anybody is, first of all, clear the decks. And that's essentially what we have to do in whatever sense we can achieve that. And I have a formula that's in my book which simplifies that and does it in a very systematic way, which helps people to basically clear their mind and then structure it in a way so they actually know what they're going to be doing moving forward. And so when you kind of reduce the chaos, life becomes a little bit easier to manage because you've got a bit more structure to your life. And then in terms of like, the brain's always there's neuroplasticity, but unless you calm the brain down, nothing's going to work. So that essentially, as I said, the key is making space to allow for that to change.
To relate back to the computer era, that's what they used to call defragmentation in the olden days in the computers, okay? Dumping it. Now, I'm actually, I didn't mean to lead you into this because that's exactly what we do in our masterminds. I am running what we call early morning rituals, which allows people to understand the clearing of the mind through certain processes. And the process is very simply put, that one of the elements is mindful exercises, and the other is in relation to making sure they understand breathing exercises and they understand how to turn around and look at meditation, visualization, all of these components put together. And if you have a recipe of how we can work it together, which is what I do, it enhances a person's soundness.
Absolutely. So the formula that I have is a very practical, very easy formula to follow. So it deals with the actual practical aspects of their life and the actual things that are going on in their life. Because if you get that organized, then that's a whole lot of stuff that's basically in a better form and in a better structure, and they have a better direction.
Yes.
And I agree with you. Meditation, mindfulness, that helps in the moment. So doing breathing exercises, being mindful, meditation, at that point can relax somebody almost like a Control-Alt-Delete on a computer. It just resets them and then allows them a little bit of space to then deal with some of the issues in their life, or then slowly bring things in that they can handle. But it doesn't take away from the fact they still have this massive giant washing machine behind them of stuff that someone's doing. So both need to be done. But my formula is more practical. My formula deals with that giant washing machine. It helps organize that giant washing machine of their mind.
Right. That's fabulous. And when are you planning to look at releasing the book?
Yeah, hopefully it should be out in the next coming, hopefully 2 to 3 months, subject to editing and publication issues. So I'm going to launch an ebook first soon, because it'll get that out as soon as possible before I actually get a hard copy. But you'll be able to get a hard copy through Amazon anyway, through their publishing network.
Great. And do you plan, how are you going to go globally with the book?
I do, because the formula which I've used for patients, now it normally takes me an hour to deliver it to patients when they come to see me in my practice, which is obviously not very efficient because I can only do one person at a time per hour. So by writing a book about it, I can share it to more people at once. And it's a very simple formula that's easily translatable. So I do plan to take it global and to help as many people as possible, because I want to help as many people with this affliction who are suffering from this to basically better their lives and get it better organized and become less stressful for them. Right.
I'd like to see you taking it into India, especially when you talked about those statistics over there. We need to look at how we can, slice it into to the communities out there. And as long as that awareness is brought out, and it's going to help enormous number of people. So as we get closer, we might even have another interview with you on the launch of the book, and then see how we can, showcase that for you.
Yeah, I'll be delighted to come back, David.
Good. Good. What else do you think would be of huge benefit from a perspective of an employer? I want to do each segment now. From a perspective of an employer, to be consciously aware, what do you think are other key elements that I need to highlight?
I think there's usually a pattern. It's never just one thing in isolation. So, for instance, if, I think from an employer's perspective, so if there are performance issues with their work, that would obviously be, from an employer's perspective, that would be their concern because it's affecting the business. But if, let's say, for example, they also noticed that quite frequently they were late coming to work, as a common feature, then that is like a little bit of a warning bell that there's something else going on as well. And then there's other clues. So, which just the personality traits. So the kind of personality traits that someone with ADHD would exhibit is they're quite fun. We're quite fun, energetic people because they're always on the go. So they can be the life and soul party. They can be the office clown because they're usually quite quick-witted, and they can be identified as the employer who's usually got good ideas, because people with ADHD, it's not all bad. Having ADHD is not all bad. People with ADHD also have a superpower if they're interested in something. And so if they're if they're interested in something, they become very good at doing something. So they usually come up with really good ideas. So it's not all bad. And that's why sometimes employers might be forgiving of them, because they come up with the good ideas for them. But a trait that someone with ADHD has is they're impatient. So when you're having a conversation, they'll quite often interrupt people. So if they do that, that's another little flag to say they might have ADHD.
Right.
But it's these kind of awarenesses.
Yeah, and this is why I wanted to drive this fact, so employers actually are not short-sighted, and they're consciously aware of this, and not wait for the HR department to come through the process and say this patient has got such and such case. Now the same thing applies, keeping the employers on the side, in relationships. So in a husband-wife relationship, child-mother relationship, child-father relationship, especially in India with that extended families, community living, the ADHD might be aware to some, but not to all. Hence, they are intolerant of certain behavior patterns, certain outbursts. How can that awareness be curtailed or approached and advised?
I mean, that's a difficult one. It's a tricky question, because it's not a problem until it becomes a problem, and that's it. And then sometimes it gets to a problem where there's a breakdown in the relationship. Couples are going to couples counselling or separating, and they don't. I have to say, from my experience, they don't recognise it until it becomes a really big problem, and it lands in the realm of couples therapists and counsellors and psychologists. You tend to land in their feet because it's causing problems. They don't realise it. So I think the reality is, from my experience, people don't recognise it. I think, going back to what I said before about social media, raising it raising the symptoms in social media, people being aware of the traits that happen. I think by doing that, publicising that, and then if people are noticing that, oh God, they're ticking a few boxes, then it might point in the direction that, maybe there is an issue. Maybe I need to look at possibility of a diagnosis of ADHD.
Right. Now, on the same approach, some of the behavior patterns that people utilize as excuses, and what do I mean by behavior patterns? Their short-temperedness, they're not prepared to work towards what they have put out as a goal,
Mm.
Can we identify that as a byproduct of this, or is it just no? That's not anything to do with it.
Yeah, those things are very subtle and very hard to pick up. When as a doctor, if I ask about it, I'll get the responses, and I get patients nodding their head. Oh, it's like I know them. They feel like I've been a spy in there, and as a fly on the wall, and I know everything about them, and I go through the traits. But they are impatient, but it doesn't always show. So they get easily frustrated, but you don't see that. So they just become impatient. They don't like people who are slow because they can perform very quickly. They get very frustrated with people who perform slowly, but you never can pick that up unless you ask them. And they get frustrated very easily by people who are slow, but unless you ask them, they won't tell you. So it's not easy as an employer from that perspective to identify. To be honest, if you're not, it's like even for doctors, if you're not thinking about it, you won't see it.
Right.
So you have to be thinking about it. And then people like myself who have the affliction, I can see it much easier because I can identify it in the patients that I see in front of me. So it's easier, but also medicine is my superpower. And so I can see it much more easy than other people, than other doctors.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned dopamine, and I know it's one of the dose chemicals, and part of that, obviously, you can identify people that have a craving for sugar. They have a craving for chocolates. They fall into alcoholism in the case of depression. Now, those type of symptoms and signs, should we encourage the person to take it one step further to go for diagnosis?
It's a very good question, David, but it's not a simple answer, because eating disorders have cravings for sugar, cravings for chocolate, binge eating is prevalent in lots of mental health conditions, not just ADHD.
Okay.
So, if people have eating disorders, if people have anxiety, they binge eat. If people have depression, they binge eat. If you have ADHD, you can binge eat. So it's not exclusive for ADHD. So it's not a tool that we use as a diagnostic tool to identify people. So it's a very poor discriminator to find people with ADHD. But it does. But then some people binge eat for other reasons as well. So it's not even for mental health reasons. So it's not a good test, I have to say.
Okay, I understand that. And just alerting, because some people would say dopamine, suddenly the light bulb comes up for, these symptoms. Can I use?
Yeah, I think, if they have those traits, like the cravings, like they crave sugar, they when they eat, they overeat, along with all the other symptoms that I mentioned about, the overburden, starting new tasks before finishing old tasks, being overwhelmed, having a bit anxious, analysis paralysis, procrastination, a little bit of depression. The more things that you tally together, the more that come together, then the more likelihood they have an issue. But in isolation, no one thing says that one person has ADHD. It's the more things that you have leading towards it makes it more likely that you have that diagnosis.
Fabulous. Andy, thank you so much for coming on, taking time off your precious practice. But before we leave, I would like you to give a sum up message for the audience so they can actually leave with a bit of comfort from listening to what we've said to them and not feel depressed from it. Please help me.
Yeah, look, ADHD is a very common problem. So if during this radio podcast, the TV podcast, that you found some of the symptoms resonate with you, then I think, go to an online test, just see if you got it. Because I think one of the best things about any diagnosis is awareness. If you know you got something, then, and because people think that when they do things, not suboptimally, and they mess up, we beat ourselves up about it really badly. And we're very hypercritical of ourselves. But if you actually realize that the reason why you do certain things is your personality trait, because you have ADHD, it's not you, it's your ADHD trait, then you actually will forgive yourself for the kind of things that you've done, either recently or in the past. So I think awareness is the key. Awareness. So if you think you got it, and then I would suggest look into perhaps doing an online screening test. And if you do, then look into the condition, look at all the different traits. And if it resonates with you, then I think that would help you understand yourself better, and that can only be a good thing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Andy, once again, thank you so much. We will connect again somewhere for a cup of coffee or a beer and catch up with you. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And audience, thank you so much for your presence and attention.
You're very welcome. See you again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.